In the afterlife, everything turned out to be different from what he had imagined. There was neither the oblivion that skeptics and atheists talk about, nor the heavenly visions that are described in books about life after death. The picture that appeared in front of him caused a shock. Watch the video to the end, and you will find out what scared him so much and why he was convinced from personal experience that everything in the afterlife is not as it is commonly believed. I spent 25 years in law enforcement, and during that time, witnessed many tragedies. Most often, they concerned children. One case I remember especially strongly. A girl who was not even 2 years old was put in a cage by her parents, along with a cat. Such situations made me doubt whether justice existed at all, Howard Pittman recalled. As he grew older, his faith began to fade. He stopped praying, considering it useless. I didn't ask him for anything else, Howard said, reflecting on his past. He was sure that he would have lived his life without faith if one day he had not encountered an event that changed everything. In the summer of 1979, he suffered a clinical death. During this state, he found himself in the afterlife, which shook him to the depths of his soul. This experience was a turning point. After coming back to life, Howard rethought his views. He abandoned his past skepticism and began a new path, realizing that the spiritual side of life is much more important than he could have imagined before. In 1979, Howard Pittman decided to run for sheriff. His niece, who worked at the bank, persuaded the president of the bank, an influential man, to meet with her uncle. The meeting was scheduled for the morning of August 3rd. On the eve of the meeting, Howard went to bed as usual. In the morning, he felt strangely weak, lost his appetite, and even skipped breakfast. He told his wife that he needed to hurry so as not to be late for an important meeting on which his company depended. At that time, he did not suspect that this day would bring him a completely different meeting. When he reached the place, Howard entered the bank, and his niece met him at the door. At that moment, he felt very unwell and fell to his knees. His niece supported him, and later doctors reported that Pittman suffered a rupture of the largest artery. He needed emergency surgery to save his life. During the operation, a cardiac arrest occurred. According to Pittman, he found himself in a world of darkness. Here he was aware of himself, but he was completely alone. Howard knew he was dying, and he couldn't accept it. He left the house with thoughts of winning the election, not of death. Unwilling to accept what was happening, he turned to God with a request to prolong his life. Suddenly, he heard a voice that struck him with its beauty. No music on earth could match this sound. A voice said, "You'll get everything you wanted. Just stop breathing." Howard struggled to take a breath, and for a moment he wanted to obey that voice. But then he realized that if he stopped breathing, he would die. But he asked to prolong his life, not to take it away. Then Howard realized that God would not ask him to do such a thing. The voice never came back. Howard didn't know how long he had been there. At some point, creatures came to him, whom he later called guardian angels. They told him that he would be shown a world of darkness and a world of light, and then he would come back to life. Then Howard found himself in a world he couldn't even guess at. This world was inhabited by many spiritual beings whose numbers were comparable to the sand on the seashore. They explained that these beings are lower spirits that exist in thousands of forms and guises. Some of them look like people, but their height reached about 8 feet, which is about 2.5 meters. Others resembled the animals of our world, but there were also those whose appearance was so disgusting that it was difficult to bear. Howard also noted that in this world, sounds were perceived not by the ears but by the mind. "I heard them with my mind," he explained. Traveling through this world, he noticed that he does many things differently than in physical reality. For example, he could communicate without opening his mouth, at the level of the mind, as if the words were transmitted in the form of thought waves, which the interlocutor perceived and responded in the same way. Howard claimed that he moved through the spiritual world without feeling physical movement. It seemed to him that he was moving at the speed of thought. As soon as he named a place, they immediately found themselves there. During this trip, Pittman could ask any questions and get answers to them. For example, he learned that animals in our world also have souls. But there is a fundamental difference between their souls and the souls of humans. Our soul belongs to the spirit, and the soul of an animal belongs to the body. When an animal's body dies, its soul disappears with it, and the human soul remains with the spirit even after the death of the body. I believe that the soul is a person's personality. All the time I was out of my body, I remained myself. My personality and abilities have not only been preserved, but have also become much sharper and stronger. Howard Pittman shared his experience. During his journey through the world of darkness, it was explained to him that the lower spirits are real beings, and they are the source of evil in our world. Pittman learned that there is a continuous struggle between the human spirit and the forces of darkness for control of the physical body. He realized that the lower spirits cannot interfere in our lives without our consent. In the same way, guardian angels cannot act if our will resists their help. Their role is to protect us from attacks by lower spirits when we are not aware of the threat. However, angels are powerless if a person voluntarily allows the forces of darkness to affect themselves, he explained. At the end of his journey, Pittman found himself in a place he described as a tunnel or road surrounded by an invisible shield. The space was filled with bright light. He saw people in this tunnel and, becoming interested, asked his escorts who they were. The answer was simple: these are souls who return home. He was told that 2,000 people had died on Earth during their journey, but only 50 of them were allowed to walk along this road. At a certain stage, I was told that I couldn't go any further. Then I heard a voice. It wasn't as beautiful as the voice I heard in the dark. This voice began to tell me about the kind of life I had lived. I couldn't believe what I was hearing and was sure that it wasn't about me. But the voice suddenly disappeared, as if turned off. After that, my companions took me back to the hospital room where my body was located. They said that I would be healed. The last thing I remember is opening my eyes and realizing that I'm back in my body. Rajiv Parti is about another world and life after death. All the stories about the afterlife are lies. It's not like that at all. I was being carried towards the fire pit as if on a conveyor belt. This is how anesthesiologist Rajiv Parti, who survived clinical death, shared his experience. This experience turned out to be so shocking that it changed his perception of the world, as well as his profession. During the operation, his soul left his body. He saw what was happening from above, as if he was looking at everything from the ceiling. I often heard similar stories from patients: bright lights, figures of deceased relatives, or mysterious images, says Parti. But I didn't take these stories seriously, advising people to go to psychiatrists. My view changed when I experienced something similar myself. Rajiv faced cancer, which requires complex treatment, at the age of 53. During one of the operations, he suffered a clinical death. This experience turned his understanding of the boundary between life and death upside down, confirming that patients' stories of out-of-body experiences can have a real basis. Like most doctors, I was a staunch materialist, Rajiv recalls. But the day after Christmas in 21, events occurred that radically changed my fate. High fever and deterioration of health forced him to go to the hospital. An operation was scheduled on the same day. I didn't expect a miracle. The disease exhausted me, and I was preparing for the worst, admitted Parti. During the operation, he suddenly felt his consciousness leaving his body. It all started with the feeling that the white ceiling of the hospital was rapidly approaching. A moment later, he saw his surgical team above his body. What was happening to me did not fit into the usual framework of science. Where is my brain? Why do I keep thinking, how can I see and hear? These questions haunted me, Parti said. At first, he suggested that one of his colleagues might have mixed a substance into the solution that causes hallucinations, but soon this explanation seemed to him untenable. These reflections led him to an unexpected conclusion. The soul exists. For a materialist, realizing this has become a real challenge. Will I return to my body, or will my consciousness remain wandering in the vast expanses of the universe? He had heard similar stories from patients before, but had never taken them seriously. Most likely, my colleagues will do the same if I tell them about it. Or worse, they'll laugh at me. After all, a person is used to believing only in what he can see, and the spiritual is inaccessible to our eyes, he reflected. At that moment, his thoughts were interrupted by thoughts of his family. He saw his parents' house thousands of kilometers away. A scene appeared before his eyes. His mother in a green sari and his sister in jeans and a red sweater were sitting on the couch discussing how to make lentil soup. "Mom, I'm here," Parti tried to say, but no one reacted. He came closer and touched his sister, but his hand went through her shoulder as if she were a mist. Or, the party itself has become a ghost. He continued to watch as his mother and sister got up and went to the kitchen. Suddenly, he heard the metallic clang of instruments. He instinctively turned towards the sound and saw his colleagues engaged in the operation again. At that moment, he realized something amazing. His consciousness could be in several places at the same time. I watched these scenes as if they were happening in the past and the future at the same time. He recalls. Gradually, the images began to fade, as if the sun was setting over the horizon. Darkness enveloped everything around him, and for a moment he felt relieved. "I'm finally getting back into my body," he thought. But joy quickly turned to fear when he noticed a storm approaching from the right. It burst out with loud peals, filling everything around. On the edge of the abyss engulfed in fire, Rajiv felt the inevitable approach. He recalled how, coming out of the darkness, he found himself in front of a giant burning pit. Her heat seemed to devour everything around her. "It was like I was being carried along a conveyor belt right into the fire," he recalled. A terrible thought flashed through my head that this could be hell. While he was trying in vain to get out, he heard a voice close to his ear. "You didn't love anyone." Rajiv looked around, but saw no one. However, he knew that these words were meant for him, and that it was true. He realized how indifferent he was to his patients. For him, they have always been just a source of income. He acted mechanically, without empathy, showing it only to those who could be useful to him because of their status or connections. On the edge of this pit, he remembered his patients, whom he often ignored. Among them was a woman who suffered not only from physical pain, but also from mental pain. Her husband was dying of cancer, and she was waiting for advice or comfort, but Rajiv only said that he had little time and went to other patients. He also recalled how his colleague had announced the death of their loved one to the family in a trembling voice. The relatives hugged each other, sobbing, and Parti watched this distantly, thinking only about the next operation and that he would soon be able to go home. The thought of the patients turned out to be just the beginning. Parti also remembered his family. He realized how cruelly he had treated his wife and children, especially his son. He wanted his son to become a doctor and take full control of his life, regardless of his desires or feelings. At the edge of hell, I realized that my life had been wasted. I didn't have a chance to change anything anymore. I felt powerless, scared and overwhelmed by the fear of what awaits me in the fiery abyss. But what struck me most was the realization of the selfishness and cruelty with which I treated my loved ones. The situation seemed hopeless, but I still turned to God with a plea. "Give me another chance." And then I saw an unexpected rescue. A man I never expected to meet here. It was my father, recalls anesthesiologist Rajiv Parti. Raja's father passed away 20 years ago, but at that moment, during their unexpected meeting, he looked younger than in the last year of his life. Memories of him had always been associated with cruelty, punishment, and coldness, but now Rajiv was facing a different person. His eyes were shining with light, and he held out his hand. Together, they stepped into the tunnel. Parti saw his ancestors in this tunnel, who had long since left the earthly world. They accompanied him all the way out, but he was left alone outside the tunnel. It was there that he met a creature that looked like an angel. The creature told him that he had to return to Earth and change his life. He had to leave the profession of an anesthesiologist and devote himself to helping people suffering from mental illness. He was supposed to become a soul healer, Rajiv said. After these words, he felt himself starting to move rapidly. Dazzling fields flashed in front of him, and at that moment, he realized that his return was an opportunity to start from scratch. He returned to Earth, realizing that his first conscious day was starting right now. After this experience, Rajiv Parti left his medical practice and devoted his life to helping others, becoming a soul healer. Write in the comments what you think about these words and whether you believe in life after death. Dear friends, thank you for watching my video to the end. If you liked it, please like it and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It's very important. Thank you and have a nice day.